From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. You can submit your questions anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. It's the weekend of the big game. Get your snacks and beverages ready and don't leave that TV. We have been promised by CBS that our new Pod Therapy commercial is set to air right after the Beatles halftime show. Don't miss it. And now, broadcasting from the Churn, that guy is Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangeman. It's time for some Pod Therapy.
You know, the only way we're ever going to get any kind of... we have to rush the field. So I don't even think we could get to the Super Bowl. Where is this? Is it in Atlanta?
Yeah.
Oh, man, I wish that the Saints would have won, just to rub dirt in the eyes. So, Jacob, are you joining this class action lawsuit? Are you gonna fight for this?
A lawyer friend of mine sent it to me.
Yeah.
He sent it over to me.
What is this?
The Saints fans are suing the NFL for
Oh,
blowing
really?
the call at the end of the game that gave the Rams the win.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
So they're all suing, and I love it. I think it's great. I want Commissioner Goodell just to have to freaking go to court for the rest of his life for blown calls.
Oh, it's terrible.
It's pretty rough. It's pretty rough. So, yeah. No, I'm sorry for your loss, man.
Yeah.
That was a rough one.
It's terrible.
It was funny because on Twitter, people were like, can we get a wellness checkup?
I did see that.
And nobody's heard from him for like 3 days. It's like, just let him grieve, guys. He's just pacing a cemetery somewhere trying to make sense of his life. Don't worry about it. But, yeah, so excited for the big game. And I don't think that they're going to air our commercial. I don't...
They assured us. I don't know, they promised.
That guy that you gave all that money to?
Yeah.
Yeah, the guy that had the CBS shirt on?
We were about
Yeah.
$2 million short of our goal
of
money to get that commercial on air.
Yeah.
Your goal of $2 million.
Yeah.
You were
You're about
roughly
$2 million short.
Real
Real close to that. Yeah, about 2.999. 1.999.
Yeah.
Or a little under. Didn't have quite enough Theraproducers.
Yeah.
Maybe Steve Wynn will sponsor the show. That would be fun.
There we go.
Yeah. But speaking of trauma,
Yeah.
speaking of Saints trauma and losing an important football game, we are opening the show with a new skill. That's something we were trying to do more of. Last time around, we talked about coping skills and some really good feedback. A lot of people really, really liked that. And so this time we're going to talk about a skill that we'll sometimes use that has to do with trauma. So real quick, before we dive into this activity, it's more of an arts and crafts activity, which I think is kind of fun because a lot of these are thinking activities, and sometimes it's hard to remember what we were talking about, but this one's something you can tangibly create, and I think it's really, really helpful. So, but before we talk about that, we have to talk a little bit about trauma. So first off, it's a word I think everybody throws around. You know,
Right.
We've all heard it. People say, oh, that's trauma, this person went through trauma. So I think that makes it a little bit confusing about what it means. And some people, I think, overvalue it, and they think like you have to have survived near death in order to
Right.
have trauma. And some people undervalue it, and they say like, you know, we were out of milk, and now I'm traumatized. And so it's like, okay, we got to find the middle ground, right? So the way that we generally think of what is a trauma is we think of anything that causes like a significant amount of negativity or is beyond your ability to language at the time. So if it's something that's bigger than you at the time that it happens and it haunts you and kind of has this effect where retroactively it kind of causes you to be avoidant of things that remind you of that, or it causes you to have kind of flashbackiness or just a general tension and you don't always know why, that's usually what we're talking about with trauma. So yeah, it can be that a bomb blew up, you know, a car whenever you were in Iraq, or it could be as simple as finding out there was no Santa Claus, you know, whenever you were 7 and it was just bigger than you at that moment. You know, you weren't mentally capable of grasping what was being told to you and it left you kind of spiraling. So trauma can be anything. And so one of the things that's really interesting in therapy is trauma comes out a lot. It's a big topic. It's something we're always interested in. We want to learn why are people going through what they're going through. And one of the things that we'll sometimes do with folks, especially in addictions, because trauma and addiction are literally PB&J. Yeah. Like it's always together. I've never met somebody dealing with addiction that has not had trauma in their life.
It's pretty rare. I mean,
Yeah.
especially now as we have become, as addiction counselors have become kind of more mental health focused, and mental health clinicians
it's going toward addictions
have so back in the past they used to be very siloed.
Yes,
you know, you'd go, you know, the two sides never communicated, and now we're seeing a lot more co-occurring. And as we become more familiar with that, we are seeing definitely there's a huge connection between trauma
I think it's the
and
number
addiction.
one thing. I think that the
I would
number
agree, too.
one thing that if you're thinking about what is the most comorbid condition with any kind of addiction, I would say trauma is most likely to be indicated.
Yeah.
And whether that's sexual trauma, just life trauma, whatever it is very likely to be indicated. So one of the things that we'll do with somebody to kind of help them get their arms around some of the experiences they've had in life is we'll create something called a trauma timeline. And this is actually one of my very favorite activities. I first learned it from Dr. Johanna O'Flaherty, our old boss, over at Las Vegas Recovery Center, who's like a trauma expert. Like that is her jam. Has written some tremendous books about it. If you want to Google her and find a book on her from her, Johanna, Johanna O'Flaherty, and it's like, oh gosh, it's so Irish, isn't it? Do you remember how to spell it? It's like
apostrophe Flaherty.
Yeah, Flaherty.
Yeah, something like that.
Something to that effect. So anyway, here's how you do a trauma timeline. So you take a piece of paper and you lay it down landscape style, right? So it's not going to be tall, it's going to be long. And what you're going to do is you're going to basically create a Cartesian plane. And if that sounds too exciting, just think back to 10th grade geometry when you did graph paper, right? And you create an x-axis and a y-axis. Okay, so again, if these are big words that you're not feeling right now, let's break it down. 2 lines. One line go up and down, one line go left and right. Okay, so just take that, and you're going to take the paper. Now, you're not going to put that in the middle of the paper like a cross. You're not doing that. You're going to put it on the far left of the paper and just do like a line that goes up and down. Give yourself about a thumb's amount of space between the margin of the paper and where you start the line. And you're going to do the line all the way up and down. And then you're going to cut that line in half with the long horizontal line that's going to go all the way across the paper. So when you look at it, you've basically got the letter T on its side. Okay, that's what you've essentially created. So on that vertical line, here's what you're going to do. You're going to look at the top half, and I want you to basically cut it into 5 pieces, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way at the top. Then you go to the bottom half of that vertical line, and you do the same thing, but you go negatives, right? So again, this is just a graph. That's all you're doing, making a graph, right? -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. What do these numbers represent? They represent power level. Okay, like the significance of a thing. So something that's going to score like a +5 means that is among the greatest events in my life in a positive way. So like the birth of a child, a marriage, something really, really important, winning the lottery, starting a podcast,
Right.
up there with having a child. So like that's a +5. Whereas a +1, might be something it's significant, it matters, it shows up on your timeline, but it's not up there at the +5. So that could be got a new job and was really proud of myself for that, or finished high school, or whatever. The negatives work the same way. A -1 matters, it left an impact on you. It's not as devastating as a -5. So like a -5 might be like the death of somebody. And again, it's all relative, right? Like
Right.
my -5 is not your -5.
Right.
So you've got to think to yourself, relatively speaking, how am I going to organize my life events on its pain to pleasure ratio, okay? So if it's above the line, it's positive. If it's under the line, it's negative. So let's talk about that horizontal line. That horizontal line is just a timeline. That's all it is. So most folks, if you are aged, in your 30s or older, you're usually going to divide that line into 5-year increments. And so you basically just put little hash marks down the line and create, every 5 years. And it doesn't have to be like, very meticulous in this. You're just giving yourself some general ideas. So once you've got some times marked out there, like every 5 years, every 10 years, however you want to do it, then you start plotting points. So you go through the timeline and you actually put a dot down, so you might say 5 years old, -2, found out there was no Santa Claus. And that's all you do. You just put the point down, we can glance at it, and then you just write a couple of words to remind us what that is. And so it might be Santa Claus. And that's it. And then you go on. And then you get to 27 years old, -3. You plot a point, divorced. And, just a word, right? And so by doing this, you kind of comb through your life story and you try to think through the most positive, the most negative things that you've encountered, and you try to score them. And then by doing this, it really reveals a lot of things. First off, it creates a catalog. Catalog of your life events. That's really, really helpful if you bring that to a therapist or even for your own personal reflection. And secondly, it's very important because it also teaches us trends. You
Yes.
start to look at this and go, wait a minute. I have like 3 negative traumas here that have to do with the loss of a romantic relationship. Oh my God, what do I notice about myself in my romantic? I'm really skittish. I'm really distrusting. I've been cheated on 3 times. Like I'm really scared. Okay, I've been traumatized by that, right? But putting that into visual perspective gives us sort of this ability to stand back and look at our life and look at these significant events in a really abstract way.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of the whole purpose of this is we want to be able to identify patterns. I mean, that's one of the things that I've found most useful in this with clients that I've worked with, especially me being an addictions counselor. I look at patterns of when good things were happening, when bad things were happening, and what was the age in which you started using.
Right.
What was the age in which you recognized that this was a problem.
Right.
What was happening during the good moments when you were actually able to put together, some time with sobriety. What were things that were happening at that moment?
Right.
What were the things that led back to a relapse? And you can talk about relapse in the sense of mental health as well, not just with addiction, but look at depression, right?
Right.
So you can kind of compare that timeline to when you were experiencing symptoms.
Yeah. Well, that's what's so powerful too, right? Because when you start looking at that timeline, you start noticing some things lining up together. Because you'll start looking at your timeline going, oh my God, this thing happened, and then I tried this hard drug, or then this other thing happened, and then I got into this bad relationship. And it's fascinating to take a look at this.
Yeah, and you can even look at how good and bad things were happening in terms of when relationships were occurring.
Right.
Yeah. So, this relationship didn't work out. Well, and it started right at the time that I had this particular trauma.
Right.
And then every time there's a significant trauma, it always seems to line up with me starting a new relationship right after that happens.
Right.
Why do I not have success in relationships?
Yeah, and what's neat about a trauma timeline is it becomes sort of the scaffolding upon which we build the rest of your life story. Mm-hmm. So once we have those like plotted points, then we start looking at it and saying, tell us more about your life.
Right.
And that's when we start to reveal like, oh, well, I was in this career from this time to this time. I was at this marriage from this time to this time. And so now we're starting to like put the dressing on top of this. And when we see the overlay, it's like, whoa, let's increase that self-awareness. And so one of the most powerful things about a trauma timeline is not merely creating it, though that is, it's then guiding somebody through it. So when I have patients do this, I have them do it at home. I teach them how to do it. They do it for homework. They come back. I get a copy of it. They have a copy of it. And then I take it and I say, take me through your life. And then one by one, they show me each idea, because there's only a couple of words on the page, Santa Claus, divorce. And they start telling me the story that goes behind that. And man, having that as a map as a therapist is one of the most profound, I'd say that and a genogram are 2 of the most valuable things I can be holding in my hand whenever I'm going through somebody's life. And so that's a huge thing.
You should explain what a genogram is.
Oh, okay. Genogram. Genogram is a enhanced family tree. So it's a family tree if it's like every possible dimension of the family was on there. Whether somebody had a mental health thing, whether somebody died, whether there was divorces, whether somebody was cheating, the individual relationships each person had to the other. Was that a violent relationship? Was it a jealous relationship? Was it an angry relationship? Was it an impassioned relationship? Was there favoritism? All sorts of stuff. So it's an at a glance family tree that is heightened and enhanced because it has so many other aspects to it, and it's all coded in this visual stuff that we use to make one. So if you want to look it up, genogram might be something we'll do on the show. I wanted to do it as a technique, but it's so visual.
It is very visual.
Really hard to like walk listeners through it. It might be a video we do one day. But type it in, Genogram, Gram. That's how you spell it. Genogram. Yeah. That's it.
So, yeah.
I wanted to like MME for the British audience. It's not a unit of measurement. But yeah, so check out Trauma Timeline.
So one other thing I want to add to the whole trauma timeline, because I know some folks get
adding to my trauma timeline, Nick.
Some folks get a little turned off with the word trauma. because they will look at that and say, well, I don't have any history of trauma. This isn't going to be useful. Even if you don't have anything that you identify as, say, trauma, like, I've never been to war, so I'm good.
Doesn't count, right.
Yeah, it still is useful to look at things, and if you don't want to call it trauma, you don't have to. You can just look at good and bad things that have happened.
Yes.
My dog died.
Yes. I'm glad you clarified that, because you're right. People get thrown off by that word, and they say, oh, well, and again, that's why it's scored the way it is.
Right.
-5 is like probably the real seismic stuff. -1 is, I lost my dog, or, I was written up at this job, or I was fired as a waiter, and like it stayed with me, And so it's just a life events, kind of thing, but really powerful to do, guys. So if you're playing the Pod Therapy homework game at home, give that one a shot. Trauma timelines.
And for those of you who are currently in therapy, this would be a good thing to actually take with you to your next session.
Oh my gosh. And when your therapist is like, who taught you this? You don't tell them about us. Did you see one of our listeners talked about that? She said like she goes into therapy once a week and I won't reveal who it is, even though she talked about it online. But she goes into therapy once a week and the therapist says, so what'd you hear on the show this week? And I don't know how to interpret that.
Like, I know, that makes me very nervous.
I think she's in therapy because of our show.
Definitely a good thing.
We're the trauma. Yeah, it's just like an abusive relationship with a podcast.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will discuss how to react to a family member's alcoholism. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
This week's Theraproducer sponsor is Judi Schneider, who's going to be in Vegas pretty soon. We got to hang out with them. Judi wants to give a shout out to her dear friend, Dr. Hariyardi Shashima Abdul Majid, and her amazing team members at Mercy Malaysia. Mercy Malaysia offers early counseling and psychosocial support for persons affected by disasters and gives the victims a safe space to express their feelings and thoughts. Sharima is currently caring for her father, who's suffering from Alzheimer's, while still organizing and planning for Mercy Malaysia when time allows. Judi wants the world to know how proud of Sharima she is and her astounding work ethic, and just wants to say that she loves her, misses her warm hugs, and thinks about her wonderful father every day. If you'd like to join Judi and make this show possible, you can go to www.patreon.com/therapy and sign up. Again, that's patreon.com/therapy. We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and our next question is about reacting to a family member's alcoholism. Hi guys, I have a question in regards to how to react in a certain situation. I have an extended family member, a 31-year-old woman, who almost died from renal failure last year due to being an alcoholic. She declined over the course of a year, which included a handful of visits to the ER after she had collapsed at home. However, the final emergency came the day after a family get-together in which her appearance scared everyone. She was skin and bones, and the whites of her eyes were a fluorescent yellow, and the next day she had a seizure and was taken to the hospital. She was in an induced coma while they tried to stabilize her vitals. It was touch and go for several days. She was on dialysis for weeks, and after spending several more weeks in the hospital, she went to 28 days of rehab and then was allowed to go home. All was well to start with, including counseling. However, once she started back to work a couple of days a week, getting some freedom again, she started drinking and lying about her counseling. She came to my home to visit, and I could smell it immediately. Apparently, she had 2 bottles in her bag and was going into my bathroom to drink. When confronted by her partner on the way home, she denied it. He took it out of her bag and held it up to her face, and she still shook her head. I realize relapse is common. However, I don't know how we should have reacted. Not her partner, but my adult kids and I, who were there witnessing her stumbling and smelling the alcohol. We said nothing and went to dinner, but it felt dishonest to me. I'd seen her almost die last year, and despite not being directly responsible for her, I still supported her and her partner when many did not. Her partner is my ex-husband, and his well-being affects my children, and so it affects me. This is why I was so supportive, even though my son said I wasn't obliged to. My ex-husband has been asking her family for support for a couple of years, but they kept ignoring him. Her brother-in-law actually accused him of abusing her because of the bruising she had everywhere due to her falls. The police were even called. That allegation caused a real rift between her and my kids and myself. I put all of that aside when she was in the hospital, and then she turns up to my place drunk. Were we wrong to have ignored it? Would she think she fooled us because we said nothing? Perhaps I'm giving her too much credit, and she's not exactly thinking straight anyway, right? Regards, Mandy from Oz. Oh, it's Mandy Abela.
Mandy.
I should have read it in an accent. Sorry, Mandy. Next time.
Yeah, Mandy, this is a really good question. One of the things that I guess I'll start with, one of the questions that you had, would she think she fooled us because we said nothing? Well, she probably thinks she fooled everybody even when confronted.
Yeah, right.
Because she was confronted about it and she still shook her head when she was confronted about it with her partner. This is a very typical reaction to most addicts and alcoholics. They really, truly believe no one recognizes what's going on.
Isn't that amazing?
And
I've had them walk into my office drunk.
Yeah, and try to play it off like no one knows.
You came to addictions counseling drunk.
Well,
and you don't think I know.
But what's really interesting, too, is a lot of the folks that I've worked with, at the rehab, they will even, when they sober up and they get some recovery, they look back at that and they feel stupid. I can't believe I honestly thought no one knew what was going on.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of times what's so profound about that, what Mandy's talking about, you're absolutely right. There's a delusion. They're self-deluded. Yes. I mean, I've had people that they come in and you're like, so what brings you here today? And they're like, my job, my work has called me out for drinking. I don't know how they knew.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can smell it on you and you're 10 feet away. Yeah. They knew. Yeah. Like, if you walked down a hall, they knew. You couldn't keep it together. But that's the delusion. So you start thinking, nobody knows. I've got them all fooled. Even when you confront them on it.
Yeah.
But that's part of it. And that's why a lot of people think their addict love, like the family member is like a pathological liar. It's a delusional reaction.
It is. And not only that, but they're very protective of it because it's part of their survival. And I'm going to break this down biochemically just a second to kind of give you an idea of what's going on. So when we do something that's necessary for survival, our brain rewards us with a little bit of a rush of dopamine, a neurotransmitter for pleasure, to let us know, hey, this is a good thing, continue doing this, right? Even for anything that is maybe not necessary for survival, but something that we enjoy. So if I'm reading a good book, I'll get a little rush of dopamine. If I'm eating something really tasty, some kind of food, I'll get a little rush of dopamine.
Right.
But how does my brain know that the food is necessary for survival and the book is not?
Right.
It knows that because it doesn't reward those two equally.
Right.
It rewards the food more.
Yeah.
So if I go 2 days without eating or reading a book and 2 days without eating any food, which is my body going to crave?
Right.
It's going to crave the food because my brain recognizes I was getting more dopamine for this. Therefore, this is very necessary.
Right.
This is a beautiful system and it has allowed us to evolve as a species.
Yeah.
However, our bodies were not intending for these psychoactive substances.
Right.
Like this kind of came out of nowhere. And it's kind of a flaw, I guess, in evolution.
Right.
That we've got these psychoactive substances that produce so much dopamine that everything else pales in comparison.
Right.
So the food, like we would get so many people coming into the rehab who haven't eaten in like days.
Yeah.
And, they're not drinking water, like they're very malnourished because
skin and bones, like what Mandy talks about.
And when it comes to that point where they haven't had their drug for a period of time, it's not that they just want that high. It's that the brain honestly believes this is necessary for survival.
Right. And that's why you see them do things that are so irrational.
Right. And why they're very protective of it.
Yes.
And why, even when confronted, they are going to lie about it because they have to protect.
Feels like it's necessary.
Right.
And, the brain then compounds that primal instinct with the other issues of it now becomes the chief coping skill, for any kind of emotional distress. And it becomes the way that they do things. It becomes that habit form where it's like, this is how I celebrate. This is how I mourn. This is how I recreate. This is how I have sex. Mm-hmm. So to come back to that, I mean, in this case, the first thing I hear you saying, Nick, is, hey, she thinks she had you fooled no matter what. Yeah. And don't ask yourself that question. Like, what could you have done differently
it's irrelevant.
to rip the shroud off of this? No, she was going to walk out thinking that she had you snubbed.
Absolutely.
No matter what you did.
what you did.
So should she, in this kind of scenario, she did the tact of least confrontation, kind of telling herself, okay, you're in my home, we're all going somewhere, I'm not trying to drum up more problems, I'm startled, I'm surprised that you're doing this, I can see that you're doing this, but I don't know what my place in all this is.
Yes.
Should I confront you? And what are your thoughts on that?
If the feeling that you're having is powerlessness, that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. That's the main point that I want to drive home. You're going to feel powerless, even if you're doing everything right, because it is a powerless situation.
Right.
It's the 3 C's of Al-Anon that they teach. I didn't cause this, I can't control it, and I can't cure it.
Right.
And you have to really come at it from that perspective that I can be supportive when this person decides they want to do something positive. I can support that.
Right.
I can hold them accountable to things. I can try to give them, encouragement to go do the right thing. But at the end of the day, you can't control it. You didn't cause it, and you can't cure it.
Well, and the other thing is this. So I've had a lot of folks, and over the years, Nick, you and I have both had this, where families come to us and they go, okay, we're ready to confront this person. We're ready to have an intervention, but we want some expert guidance. And the first words out of our mouth are like, hey, good job. Way to get in here and get a coach, because this is going to be surgical. It's not as simple as some people make it out to be, like, hey, they just need some tough love. You stop enabling them and be tough. And if you just do that, man, they'll stop. They're only doing this because you let it happen. It's not that simple. Think about what Nick just said about survival instincts, right? It is not so simple as all they need is everybody to call them out and be mean to them. And all of a sudden they're going to go, you're right. Gee, golly, I'm going to stop drinking now. Like, no. And so there's a lot of value to this in that it's not always strategically the right choice to be confrontational, to cause the trouble. Sometimes by being the person that's still available for them to come to, you can kind of reroute them toward help, because that's important too. Part of addiction is that you destroy all of your relationships. You push everybody away because they get sick and tired of your crap. And so boundaries are very important. But I actually think that in this case, Mandy followed the right boundary. It was not her place. She probably revealed it. She revealed it to the ex-husband who confronted. That was his place. And she can inform the direct spouse, hey, this is what's going on, and be a supporter. And I think that is the right thing. It's also okay that you feel indignant. It's also the case that, you look at this and go, I can't believe how irrational, disrespectful.
And that's, yes.
It is those things.
It is. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of family members really get hung up on and really frustrated with.
They take it personally.
Yeah, they take it as a personal attack, right? She did this to me. She came into my home and she did this.
Yeah.
And again, I would go back to this idea that in her brain, this is for survival. And it's when I see this all the time when people have to go to court, and they face the judge, and the judge is like, I told you, if you do this one more time, this is what's going to happen.
How did you not understand it?
Yeah. And the person is like, they don't know how to answer because they're just like, I know, I know that I didn't forget that information.
That is the insanity.
Absolutely.
Of addiction. It really is insanity. And that's why our treatment approach for addictions is so different than almost any other behavioral health thing. We quarantine a person for 30 days. Why? Because they must be secure. We have to take them away from destroying their own life. We have to tie their hands behind their back to make sure they can't do it.
Right. And that was one other thing I wanted to point to, because Mandy had said, she kind of made the statement that she went to rehab for 28 days and then was allowed to go home.
Right.
We should explain kind of the process of what residential treatment is meant to do.
Right.
Back in the day, I want to say, the 70s, 80s, if you went to residential treatment, that was the answer. You do your residential stint and then you go home.
Right.
And then that's it. And then just go to your meetings, right? We've realized that that's not very effective.
No.
And long-term treatment has shown to be the best option. It has produced the best results, right?
Yes.
But long-term treatment doesn't mean long-term residential.
No.
What it means is it's a continuum of care.
You step down.
So the way I always like to describe this is, you've got those moving walkways at the airport.
Right.
Right. So imagine being on one of those that's going 50 miles an hour.
Right.
That's kind of like what residential treatment is.
Yeah.
And back in the day, you do your residential treatment and then you step off of that onto the ground.
And it's like,
and then we're wondering, why is everybody tripping and falling?
Right.
Why can't they continue to walk after doing this? And then we realized because that's not the answer. What we have to do is we have to step from the 50 mile an hour platform to the 40 mile an hour platform,
Right.
to the 30, to the 20. And so when she left residential treatment, I'm hoping that they set her up with a partial hospitalization
Aftercare.
program
Yes.
or an intensive outpatient program where
Stepping down.
she's going multiple times per week. And it's, probably anywhere from 9 to 20 hours a week of intense treatment after residential. Residential isn't the answer. Residential is respite.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
that's
the beginning. We're
right,
laying down
it's-
the concrete to build something upon.
Essentially,
Yeah.
it's these folks don't have very good coping skills to deal with life.
Yeah, they can't be
on life's
trusted.
terms,
You've
right?
got to bottle them up for a while.
Yeah, so you remove them from the environment so they can settle. So they
Yeah.
can just kind of relax. They can go
Well,
through the withdrawals, the detox, all
yeah.
that.
Their body needs to heal.
Yeah, and
we
you
need
start-
to feed them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
you have to start learning those effective coping skills.
Right.
And then once you've demonstrated a little bit of stability, then we step
it
you
down.
down to a lower level. But the whole process itself should take, 6 to 12 months sometimes. The whole
Yeah. Well,
continuum.
when people ask me, I usually point to a clock on the wall and I say, I want you to think of each one of these numbers as month 1, month 2, month 3. I want to see you doing something for 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
And, month 1 is being in the rehab. Months 2 and 3 is going to IOP or PHP, right? Going to weekly groups, multiple groups
Right.
per week. And then numbers 4 through 9 are doing regular weekly sessions with a therapist and going to some kind of fellowship like AA or Smart Recovery. And then, or you might go to a sober living for a while. So I want to see you go all the way around the clock, all the way to 12 months.
Right.
That's how long it takes, because that
Yeah.
first year of recovery is absolutely essential
Yeah.
in order to make it all work.
And the tendency is to look at that and say, well, treatment failed. Or the person failed.
Mm-hmm.
And I really encourage people to not look at failure, but to look at data.
Yes.
Okay, we learned something. Did we step her down too soon? Was it too big of a step down? Whatever that data is, we need to go back and reapply this.
I agree. But, Mandy, I think you handled it completely right. I sense that frustration, and that frustration is something you share with so many friends and family members and employers and supporters who are watching somebody battle the disease of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
You do have to allow that person to experience their consequences. You cannot protect them from their consequences. This is a terminal, chronic, and progressive illness. It is terminal when not treated. And so, the way that you are feeling so powerless and the way that you are frustrated by this and frightened by this, those are the appropriate reactions. And telling those who can affect her life directly, that was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. I think, just having an open dialogue with everybody, getting
Yes.
everybody
Don't
together.
keep it a secret.
Yeah, and everybody can communicate about it openly and develop a plan for how you're going to deal with it.
Yeah, good day, and thanks for writing in.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will talk about paranoia in relationships. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
This week's Theraproducer sponsor is David Datascoop Villalon. As we've mentioned before, David has an excellent blog, which everybody should read, located at www.wgdavid.com. An article I'd recommend is Short People at Brothels, which tells of a Christmas adventure with tall prostitutes, criminally expensive cocktails, and the happiest of endings. We'll have a link in the description. Be sure to share it with your friends. If you'd like to join David and help make the show possible and tap into all the special content for patrons only, you can go to www.patreon.com/therapy and sign up. Again, that's patreon.com/therapy. We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Our next listener writes in about paranoia in relationships. How does one restructure the way one thinks? I suffer from heavy paranoia, and I can't get off my track when I feel that way. It's really ruined me for most of my relationships. I went to therapy before. It helped out a lot. I was once one of those anti-therapy guys before that. But I found the light again, and then I made sure I was happy with myself before I found the love of my life. We were amazing. She never complained when I hung out with my friends, and vice versa. We were the couple everyone bragged about, saying they were jealous of us. Then we started losing touch, and I left. We split for over a year and came back to each other. We had both been with other partners, and to me, it destroyed me, and her too. But we fought through it, as far as I think I understood. We started getting jealous over everything. It was more me than her, and just knowing she was with others killed my ego. We started using weekly evaluations of positives and negatives and ways we could fix the negatives. It worked, but then I became naive about our fights and kept brushing them underneath and drank a lot. But no more than when she met me, I guess. Fast forward, she broke up with me because of my habits and the fighting. Once she left me, I was in shambles. That's when I came across your podcast. She pointed out why she left, and like I said, she was the love of my life. Of course, I went through depression, but I remembered how to self-cope, and this is where my questions come in. I went through the process of self-realizing why she left. Why did it take her leaving me for me to realize what I was doing wrong? I was always paranoid. I became controlling and would accuse her of cheating because my gut was telling me she was. I'd ask her about cheating and she'd always freak, but she never did. She eventually broke down and showed me her phone. How do I deal with this extreme paranoia for no reason when she never gave me a reason? Thanks.
Yeah, this is we come across this issue quite often.
A lot,
working
especially in
with
the digital
couples.
age, too.
Well, and I think, this and finances, I think, are probably the two biggest things that people will fight over is jealousy and thinking that the other one
and
is
therapy
cheating. podcasts.
I found that ruins a lot of
Yes,
relationships.
it does. I mean, it didn't until
and my Twitter, apparently.
It didn't until a year ago. We're off to a good start. Okay, so a few things that I was kind of thinking of, and I really want to get your take on this too, Jim. I wonder if we identified some of the same things.
Yeah.
Number one, I would question a little bit about why you broke up the first time.
Right.
Because you said, you kind of started off with, she's the love of my life, everything was wonderful, and then I left.
Right.
Okay, so that right there tells me something. That's some good data. Whatever is in that is some really good data. Something was going on that you decided that you needed to leave, to bounce. The other thing, too, is I was kind of thinking about when we tend to notice a lot of jealousy in relationships, and I think a lot of it has to do with how we value ourselves. If I don't really value myself and I have a lot of insecurities about myself, that's when I'm most likely to become paranoid about the other person leaving. Because I see that, oh my God, I am so lucky to have this person. I'm not worth having this person, so I really need to maintain this. And you just clench your fist and you hold on as tightly as you possibly can. And then it kind of creates this idea or this belief that this person is probably going to be leaving me at some point.
Right. It's that general fear. And so, when we think about the paranoia aspect, in the digital age, this has become something that's, I think, different than any other time in human history. Infidelity has always been a feature, not a bug, of the human experience, I think. But what makes it more interesting now is we have this constant ability to at any time kind of be approached by somebody, and even though we're sitting on the couch, with our mate, we can be kind of having an emotional affair or planning an affair, all right there, or setting the stage for one, right? And so there's this constant sense of fear and paranoia. And that's something that I want to come back to as thinking through this concept of trauma. Right? So whenever I see somebody that's really behaving in this kind of irrational way or behaving in a really paranoid way, my first line of thought is, okay, what has happened in that person's story, in their past, that makes them this way, right? Because if you've never been cheated on, if this is not something that you've ever been frightened by, you don't necessarily feel this sense of hypervigilance. But hypervigilance, constant checking, constant looking to reassure oneself, to feel safe again, is actually one of the diagnostic criteria that we use to notice PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So when I see a couple that's behaving in a really paranoid, jealous kind of way, really fearful, the thing I need you to understand is we got to start with you.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I can do couples counseling, we can come up with rules, but you've heard me say this before, Nick. I cannot create a system that will adequately defend your mate from the other 4 billion humans on this planet that they might have sex with. And that's assuming they're just straight.
Right.
Right? If they're bi, you're screwed. So, like, I can't create a defensive perimeter around that person. You have to be healthy, and that's why she left. She didn't leave because she was attracted to somebody else. She was kind of leaving because you became unstable, and it became a toxic thing. And I applaud you that you're able to step back and go, my God, this was starting inside of me, and I pushed this person away. And that's the great irony, folks. If you're dealing with jealousy or paranoia when it comes to relationship, the great irony is that you will push away your mate with exactly the thing that you are afraid of.
Right.
That's the great irony of it.
It's the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, it
Right.
is the self-fulfilling
Yep.
prophecy.
You believe that this thing is going to happen, so what happens? It creates insecurity, and insecurity is very unattractive.
It's unattractive. Nobody wants to constantly placate you. Nobody wants you to be constantly accused or face your wrath as if every other thing is an emergency. They can't be at ease. Their friends start to talk behind your back like, gosh, what's wrong with this person? The whole thing is very toxic. But humans do this, and I've seen women do it, I've seen men do it, and they do it because they are struggling, they are suffering, they have been through something. And if your relationship has gone through infidelity, there's a really great, and in this case I kind of chalk it up to that, Nick, because he does talk about during the break, they did date other people, so it
Right.
wasn't infidelity, but it has the same emotional effect to him, because he said, it shattered me. You
Sure.
know, we got back together, and the fact that she had been with other people really, really deeply affected me. There's a really good book by Esther Perel, and I'll actually look it up while we're still discussing the topic, but it's about kind of affair recovery, and I'll pull that up for a second. But yeah, that's a really important thing too.
No, I agree. And that was one of the things that kind of stuck out to me too, is that even though there was the understanding that, hey, we've split, we're no longer together, of course she's going to see other people. Like, she's not going to wait around for you, right? But there is that tension when you get back together, because your mind automatically is going to go to, so what were you doing while I was out? Like, when we broke up, what was going on? Your mind gets full of all these questions, and it's just going to create a whole bunch of jealousy. I think part of that is being able to manage your expectations and
Yes.
realizing that, well, yes, of course she was dating other people, as were you. And we have
Right.
to be able to compartmentalize some of that and to be able to kind of move on. So the fact that you're not able to compartmentalize and you're not able to just move on from that tells me that there's something else in the past that you
Yes.
haven't dealt with that's preventing you from being able to separate that.
You have to deal with that before you step into your next relationship. Do not make the mistake of believing this was all self-contained and it was a her thing, and the next person, as long as they give you no reason to be fearful, that you'll be fine. That's not possible. You have become wounded by this. You are hyper vigilant. You will be reactive to any sense of infidelity or cheating or loss of interest the same way a war veteran is to a firework. They are overreactive to it, and that is what you will be. And you will leap into survival mode. It will be dangerous. The two books that I really like by Esther Perel that I mentioned earlier, one is called Mating in Captivity, Unlocking Erotic Intelligence. It was published in 2006. That book's about like how to spice up a relationship so that you're having really fulfilling sex. But in 2017, she wrote another book that I really, really like. It's called The State of Affairs. The State of Affairs by Esther Perel, P-E-R-E-L. And it's called The State of Affairs, Rethinking Infidelity. She has a really good TED Talk on this too. And in that one, she makes this very simple argument. If you've had an affair, if an affair has happened, your relationship is over. Now you might think, well, wait a minute. Really? She doesn't say you can fix it. She goes, no. You can absolutely stay together. But that version of the relationship is
Yeah.
over.
Yeah, you've killed
It's
that version.
dead.
Yeah.
So you've got to treat this like you've started a brand new relationship because the old one's gone. And she frees you of trying to return to normality. But transcend that normality into a new version of the relationship, and she has some really good guidance as far as what that needs to look like.
Right.
You now live in a universe where you know they can have sex with somebody else, and they may want to.
Right.
And so that needs to change the way that you approach the relationship, and you need to check yourself, because you will not be attractive, healthy, confident if that's something you're obsessing over. So that's also a really good one. If anybody out there has ever encountered infidelity, either in the relationship they're in or if in the past and they're still affected by it, infidelity is very serious, guys. It's one of the most emotional, taxing things you can possibly go through. But there is hope, and I've seen lots of marriages, lots of relationships recover from it. You can actually come out even healthier on the other side of it. But the first version of your relationship is going to have to change into a new reality. And you know what? The other thing, last point on this, he said, God, why did it take losing her to realize what was going on?
Such is the nature of life, right?
This is the nature of life.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many marriages experience infidelity, and if they come back together and they decide, you know what, we're going to get through this, they are a better relationship. Afterward, you're a better person in a lot of ways because you've had the covers ripped off of you,
right?
And you have to rethink everything you do. And man, you really approach relationship a whole lot more passionately and a whole lot more intentionally because of what you survived.
And not just even relationships. That's just how life works.
Life works that way.
Punishment is a great teacher.
Right.
Like negative experiences. Yeah, pain teaches us a lot. We lose someone we love before we realize how important it is to communicate and to have really good relationships.
You're not crazy for that.
Yeah. And I want to end on a good point, a positive note here. Following Jim's point, you've done therapy. You know that it's effective. You're willing to do it again. That's awesome.
Yes.
So all hope is not lost. The doorway is open. You're willing to walk through it. That's the biggest challenge.
Yes.
So the hardest part is over.
Yes.
Just developing the willingness to do something about it. That's over. Now you just got to get in and do the work. Get back into therapy.
Do the healing, approach it like a trauma, do that trauma timeline. Mm-hmm. That could be a really good skill for you to start working on and bring into your therapy. And, thank you so much for the way you said that our podcast was useful. That is extremely flattering. I think that we hold no illusions that anybody gets anything out of anything we do, but I'm glad that we could join you at a time in your life when it was actually useful to have this podcast.
Yeah, and thank you for writing in.
Yeah, and thank you so much for writing in. So we have reached that time in the show, Nick, where it's time for me to apologize to different segments of humanity for all of my great crimes. Dear Walt Disney, I'm sorry I turned an innocent coloring book picture of Goofy with the caption, "Let's do something goofy," into an invitation to my wife to expand our bedroom repertoire. Also, thanks, Walt. It went great. Dear Centers for Disease Control, I'm sorry that I complained of big government overreach into the sex lives of average Americans when I read your article warning people not to kiss hedgehogs. Dear Hermit Crabs, I'm sorry that when I read you evolved larger penises to prevent other animals from stealing your shells, that I said it was a great home security system that I wanted to invest in.
Right.
And my house is safe to this day, Nick. Dear THERAPAL community, I'm sorry I drank decaf coffee and told you about it. This is somehow the most controversial thing I've ever posted on Twitter.
I doubt that.
Good Lord. I got ripped to shreds.
If that's the most controversial thing that you've posted on Twitter, then people are not paying attention
Apparently
to
they're not, because good Lord, there was a dog pile on me, man. It was ridiculous.
People care about what they care about.
Yeah, people get to pick their issues, man. Nobody cares that Jim's calling out the CDC, but, God help him if he pours a cup of decaf.
All right, and into our announcements. Valentine's Day is on a Therapy Thursday.
That's right. You guys have 2 weeks from the hearing of this episode for Valentine's Day. So we want those love and relationship letters, ASAP, so we can dedicate that whole episode to a deep dive into romance. And also, side point on that, Valentine's Day is one of the highest risk days in the calendar year for suicide. So everybody, set a reminder in your phone. Be kind to people that week. Reach out to people that week, even if you're not intending to try to sleep with them. Be kind to friends and other people that you know. Send them direct messages.
I always celebrated Singles Awareness Day.
Sad?
Yeah.
Not this year, Tangeman.
No, not this year.
Well, I don't know. You got 2 weeks.
Knock on wood.
Knock on wood. Yeah. Laura, if you're listening, the check is in the mail. Don't break up with him. Get to March, woman. You can do it.
And we've got our Pod Therapy Pinewood Derby. Information available on Patreon. All cars must be mailed in before the deadline to be eligible to compete. Do we have information on Patreon?
Yeah, it's on there.
Is it?
As far as like the weight and the rules, there's not a lot of rules in weight. But if somebody comments and says, yeah, I want to race, then I will direct message them with the address. They're sending it to my office anyway. So
Awesome.
And last thing, Kickstarter. So as you all know, we have a Patreon. We have a lot of folks, something like 70 people now, Nick, that have joined our community to be aggressive advocates for mental health and make the show possible. And we've actually recruited them to be our co-conspirators because in May is Mental Health Awareness Month. We are going to launch a Kickstarter campaign to try to raise some funds so that we can do some more ambitious projects with Pod Therapy. And so again, it's a nonprofit podcast, but this allows us to kind of have some resources to do more. A lot of people calling for new and interesting things. And so if you would like to join us in our conspiring, there's an active conversation on our Patreon. If you are a Patreon, join the conversation. We need your creativity. We need your ideas. We have a few months to put it together, but we're super excited for it. And you guys will hear more as time goes on.
And we want to thank our Patreons who support the show at www.patreon.com/therapy, especially our bosses, the Elite Eight, the mysterious and shrouded Illuminati members of our fan club, the Theraproducers. Thank you, Smitty Scoop, Jake Schneider, Robert Brownie Jr. Mint, I can't read today, Kayla Lansbury, David, Data Scoop, Villalon, Judi Schneider, Gray Whitaker, chairman of the board, and Dr. Bendon.
And if you'd like to hear this episode uncut and unedited and enjoy things like our book club, whatever happened to that, and discussion groups,
I forgot about the book club.
go to patreon.com/therapy, and thank you for supporting mental health. That's all the time that we've got for this week's session. We want to thank our landlords, the Ice Cream Social Podcast, and thanks to those of you who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, Pod Therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by opening this episode's description in your podcast app, copying and pasting the link provided into your social media. Don't forget, you can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy, on Twitter at PodTherapyGuys, and now at patreon.com/therapy.
Do you want to submit your own questions to the show? Ask anonymously at www.podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. I'm Nick Tangeman.
I'm down for something goofy.
Thanks, and we'll see you for appointment next week.
Bing, bing, bing. All right. One in the holster.